me, we will rise again!
The end of the Great Crusade was meant to be a triumph unlike any before. Humanity, scattered and broken across 1,000,000 stars, had been gathered once more under the golden banner of the Emperor of mankind. Worlds that had forgotten the name of Terra now knelt again before it. The Emperor's sons, 20 primarchs forged from his own genetic design, had brought entire sectors to heel. Each of them commanded legions of transhuman warriors, the Adeptus Astartes, warriors whose loyalty and might were unmatched, but beneath the glory, cracks had begun to form. The Emperor had withdrawn to Terra, to work in secret upon a project that none but a few could comprehend, a webway, a hidden path that would connect the Imperium through the Immaterium without ever exposing mankind to its horrors. In his absence, he had named his favored son, Horus Lupercal, as Warmaster. Horus was the brightest among them, charismatic, brilliant, and loved not only by his brothers but by the mortal hosts who followed the legions. The Emperor trusted him to continue the Great Crusade in his stead. For a time, Horus lived up to that trust. Worlds fell at his word. His charisma bound not just his own sons of the Luna Wolves but many legions to his banner. But within him grew a shadow, one seated by the gods of the warp, the ruinous powers who watched the mortal realm with envy and hunger. They whispered to Horus through dreams, through the madness of the warp, through the subtle manipulations of those who claimed to be his friends. They told him he was betrayed, that the Emperor sought to replace his sons with new creations, soulless automatons, mere mortals in gilded armor, and that Horus's glory would be forgotten when Terra rose again as the Emperor's realm of science, not war. And so the seeds of rebellion took root. The tragedy began upon the world of Davin, where Horus was wounded by a cursed blade. The healers of the Imperial army could not save him, and in desperation his followers turned to the Davinite priests, men who worshipped dark powers beneath the surface of loyalty. They brought Horus into their temple, where, between fever and vision, he was shown what he believed to be the truth, the Emperor's betrayal. He saw an empire of slaves, ruled not by the light of reason but by tyranny. He was told that only through rebellion could mankind be free. When Horus rose from his sickbed, his soul no longer belonged to the Emperor, gathered those who shared his doubts, his brothers Fulgrim of the Emperor's children, Perturabo of the Iron Warriors, Angron of the World Eaters, Mordorion of the Death Guard, Lorgar of the Word Bearers, and later, Alfarius, Conrad Kurz, and Magnus, though the latter's allegiance was one of tragedy, not desire. The galaxy burned in the fires of civil war. The Horus heresy had begun, and at the heart of it all was Terra, for the Emperor's seat was there, the cradle of humanity, the throne world. The Emperor himself, now enthroned within the Imperial Palace, turned his mind wholly to his great work, the completion of the webway, the salvation of mankind from the warp's corruption. He did not see, at first, the fires spreading among his sons, by the time he did, it was too late. The Warmaster's fleets, mighty beyond reckoning, had already carved through half the Imperium. The Loyalist legions fought bitterly to hold their ground, Rogel Dorn, Sanguinius, Vulcan, Corvus Corex, Leman Russ, and Jagatai Khan. But even they were too few, too scattered. Some, like Guilliman and the Ultramarines, were trapped far away, deceived by false orders or blockaded by traitor fleets, and so, as the galaxy tore itself apart, Horus set his eyes upon the cradle of mankind, would not simply destroy Terra. He would unmake it. He would shatter the symbol of the Emperor's divinity and prove to all the galaxy that the false god could bleed. The Siege of Terra would be the greatest war humanity would ever know. It began with silence. For 7 long months, the solar system was shrouded in uneasy calm. The Loyalists had fortified it to the extreme. The solar auxilia manned the orbital defense platforms, the Imperial fists built fortress upon fortress across the surface of Luna, and the Emperor's custodian guard stood ever watchful within the Imperial Palace itself. The palace was no mere building, it was a continent of marble, adamantium, and faith. Its walls were kilometers thick. Its spires rose higher than mountains. Beneath its surface lay catacombs, forges, barracks, and tombs stretching deep into the earth. Rogel Dorn, the primarch of the Imperial Fists, commanded its defense. The Emperor had given him one command: hold Terra, and Dorn obeyed. He transformed the palace into a fortress world. The Lion's Gate, the Eternity Wall, the Saturnine Gate, all became monuments of defensive perfection. Every gun, every emplacement, every inch of wall was measured and remeasured. The orbital stations of Mars, once allies, now burned with traitor fire. The Red Planet, under the thrall of the Dark Mechanicum, had pledged itself to Horus. Armies of corrupted machines now waited beyond the asteroid belt, preparing for the final advance. The Loyalists knew they could not win through strength of arms alone. Their hope lay only in endurance, long enough for reinforcements to arrive, or for the Emperor to complete his work beneath the palace. But Horus would not grant them that time. When his fleets emerged from the warp, the skies of Terra wept fire. The first wave struck the outer system, battleships the size of cities, escorted by a tide of demon-infested vessels, their hulls screaming as they breached reality. The traitor fleets, guided by the corrupted navigators of the warp, fell upon Pluto, Neptune, and Saturn with overwhelming force. Loyalist outposts, the proud bastions of the solar auxilia, were torn apart within days. The defenders fought bravely, but they were annihilated. Then came Mars. From its red sands rose the legions of the Dark Mechanicum, twisted machine forges vomiting forth demonic titans and hellfire engines. They struck first at Luna, where the Imperial fists had entrenched themselves. The moon became the first battlefield of the siege. For weeks, the void above it was a storm of plasma and debris. The sky above Terra turned red, lit by the burning of orbital platforms and the falling of shattered vessels. The Loyalists fought tooth and nail, their bolters echoing through vacuum-sealed tunnels, their void shields collapsing one after another. At last, Luna fell. The Traitor Legions claimed it as their staging ground, turning its craters into fortress bastions from which to bombard Terra. The Loyalists retreated behind the shields of the palace, and then, for the first time in millennia, the people of Terra saw the face of Horus. His flagship, the vengeful spirit, entered orbit, blotting out the stars. From its decks, the Warmaster broadcast his message across all frequencies, a calm, cold declaration of truth as he saw it. He told the people that the Emperor was no god, no savior, but a tyrant who sought to enslave mankind to his will. He said that he, Horus, would free them from their chains. The speech did not sway the Loyalists, but it shattered the hearts of many. On the streets of Terra, riots broke out. The populace, long worshipping the Emperor as divine, now faced the horror of division. Was the Emperor truly a god? Or merely a man who had lied to them all? The ecclesiarchy had not yet been born, faith was fractured, undefined. And so confusion spread like wildfire. Through that chaos, the traitors advanced. On the first day of the bombardment, the sky turned black. The traitor fleets unleashed their fury. From orbit, millions of tons of ordnance rained upon the surface. Entire districts were vaporized in seconds. The oceans boiled. Mountains were torn apart. The shields of the Imperial Palace flickered beneath the onslaught, each impact echoing across the walls like the heartbeat of a dying god. And yet, the walls held, for Rogel Dorn had built them to withstand the end of the world itself. The first waves broke against the shields, their bombardments scattering harmlessly across void barriers kilometers thick. The Imperial fists manned their stations with unflinching resolve. Every gun on Terra roared in reply. The Saturnine Gate, the Lion's Gate, the Eternity Wall, each became a symbol of defiance. The banners of the Emperor still flew, and beneath it all, within the depths of the palace, the Emperor worked in silence. Surrounded by the hum of machines, by the whispers of his silent custodians, he labored upon the golden throne, the heart of the webway. He could not leave. He could not fight. His presence alone kept the warp at bay, kept the demons from flooding into reality through the half-finished gate, for the Emperor's greatest dream had become his prison. Beyond the walls, Horus unleashed his legions. The sons of Horus led the assault, their green armor blackened by ash and blood. The Death Guard spread plagues that consumed the air itself, while the World Eaters tore through the trenches with chain axes howling. The Iron Warriors, masters of siegecraft, brought their immense engines to bear against the walls, while the word-bearers chanted blasphemous litanies that shook the warp. Behind them came demons, horrors of nightmare, spilling forth from the immaterium as reality itself began to unravel. The defenders fought back with everything they had. Titans of the Legio Ignatum strode across the shattered plains, their plasma weapons cutting through demons like sunlight through mist. Imperial army regiments, drawn from 1,000 worlds, fought in the streets, shoulder to shoulder with Astartes. Every hour, the traitors gained ground. Every hour, the defenders paid for it in oceans of blood. The air of Terra became a poison. The rivers ran black. The sky burned red day and night, and yet, within that horror, there was beauty, a terrible, tragic beauty. For men and women who had never known glory now fought for something greater than themselves. The imperial creed was born not in temples, but in trenches, where soldiers whispered the emperor's name like a prayer before dying. Through it all, Horus waited, could have unleashed his full might upon Terra at once. But he was cunning. He wanted the emperor to suffer, to watch his world burn, his sons die, his dream crumble. Horus wanted his father to see that love had become hatred, that loyalty had become rebellion, waited until the moment when hope was brightest, and then he would strike. But even among the traitors, there was doubt. Fulgrim, twisted now by the demon that dwelt within his blade, sought pleasure in destruction. Onron desired only slaughter. Mortarian's plagues consumed friend and foe alike. Perturabo, ever bitter, resented the Warmaster's arrogance. Only Lorgar remained steadfast, his faith in chaos unbroken. He saw in the siege not merely a war, but a holy ritual, the death of the false god and the ascension of the true. Among the loyalists, hope flickered still. Sanguinius, angelic and radiant even in despair, held the line at the eternity gate. His blood angels, bloodied but unbroken, fought with grace that bordered on divine. Dorn commanded the defenses with unyielding precision, his voice echoing through the Vox networks like a hammer striking steel. And far above, in the void, a lone fleet burned through the stars, the Ultramarines, the Dark Angels, and the Space Wolves, racing to reach Terra before it was too late. They would not arrive in time. The first breach came at the Saturnine Gate. Perturabo's engines, vast siege machines forged from the carcasses of Titans, broke through the outer curtain wall after 3 weeks of relentless bombardment. The breach was small, but it was enough. The sons of Horus poured through, their war cries echoing through the ruins. The imperial fists met them hand to hand, chainswords clashing against power axes, bolters roaring at point-blank range. The ground turned to mud and blood beneath their boots. At one point, Dorn himself descended to the front, his golden armor gleaming amidst the fire. His presence steadied his men. He fought not as a primarch, but as a soldier, silently, methodically, each blow a promise that Terra would not fall. When the gate was finally sealed again, the corpses of tens of thousands lay piled within it. The smell of burnt flesh hung in the air for days, but Horus did not relent. Every wall breached was rebuilt, every defense shattered was restored, every fallen soldier replaced by another. The siege became a cycle of endless destruction and rebuilding, of despair and defiance, and yet, the walls grew thinner. The defenders fewer at Terra bled. By the 3rd month of the siege, the palace was half ruined, the Lion's Gate spaceport had fallen to the traitors. Through it, Horus brought his Titans onto the surface. The Death Guard unleashed their plagues upon the lower hives, killing millions in days. The skies were filled with ash, the loyalists retreated again and again, falling back to the inner defenses. The Eternity Wall became the final line. In the depths below, the Emperor finally paused his work. He could no longer ignore the war raging above. He called to Dorn and to Malkador the Sigillite, his most trusted servant. They stood together in silence for a long time, surrounded by the hum of the Golden Throne. "I can no longer remain here," the Emperor said at last. "If I do not act, all will be lost. But if I leave, the webway will collapse, and the demons will flood this world." Malkador bowed his head. "Then I shall take your place, my lord." And so the regent of Terra took the emperor's seat upon the golden throne. The emperor rose, and for the first time in years, the master of mankind walked the halls of his palace once more. the war was far from over, but a new chapter had begun. The wind that swept across the ruins of the palace was thick with ash. The air trembled with the sound of distant bombardments, and the sky, once blue with the light of a dying sun, was now forever red, as though the world itself bled for the sins of its sons. The siege had lasted for months, every fortress was scarred, every wall cracked, every soldier bled. The Imperial Palace, once the symbol of mankind's triumph, now resembled a corpse, beautiful still, but broken beyond repair. Smoke coiled from its towers like ghosts fleeing the living. The traitors had not stopped their assault for a single day. The armies of Horus encircled Terra, their banners blotting out the horizon. Demons stalked the ruins where civilians once prayed. The streets were no longer streets, they were trenches, carved by bombardments and filled with blood, yet, through it all, the defenders endured. Rogel Dorn stood unbent, his armor scorched, his face carved with exhaustion. His imperial fists fought on without sleep, without food, without retreat. The custodians of the emperor held the Sanctum Imperialis, golden statues come to life. The Sisters of Silence, mute and radiant in their hatred of the warp, walked beside them, but their numbers were dwindling. The first great line of defense, the outer walls, was gone. The second, the inner bastions, was cracking. Only the Eternity Wall and the Saturnine Gate still held firm, glowing faintly beneath the constant impact of orbital bombardment. It was then that the Emperor rose from his subterranean chamber. He had not walked the surface of Terra in decades. When he emerged from the catacombs, the soldiers who saw him fell to their knees without command. For even covered in dust and shadow, his presence was like sunlight in a void, said no words, he simply looked out upon his dying world, and his eyes, cold, eternal, sorrowful, seemed to hold both wrath and forgiveness. Beside him stood Malkador the Sigillite, now seated upon the golden throne. His body trembled, already weakening beneath the strain of the psychic currents that tore at his soul. But he smiled faintly. He had always known it would end this way. I will hold as long as I can, he whispered, his voice barely audible through the psychic storm. Go, my emperor. Your sons await you. The emperor placed a hand upon his shoulder. You are the greatest of men, old friend. And then he was gone. The emperor's presence upon the battlefield was not announced, nor proclaimed. But every defender felt it. It was as if the world itself took a breath. The warp storms above the palace weakened. The screams of demons faltered. For the first time in months, the defenders believed they might yet endure. At the Eternity Gate, Sanguinius looked to the heavens. His angelic wings, torn and blood-stained, glowed faintly in the red light. Around him, his blood angels fought with a grace that seemed to defy exhaustion. They had become more than warriors, they were faith incarnate. When he saw his father walking among the ruins, Sanguinius fell to one knee. My lord, he said softly, his voice hoarse from battle. The emperor touched his shoulder. Rise, my son. The time for kneeling is over. Their eyes met, one filled with infinite age, the other with doomed purity. Both knew what was coming, for though the emperor had returned, Horus was not done. In orbit, the vengeful spirit loomed like a wound upon reality. Horus watched from its command bridge, his eyes reflecting the fires of the dying world below. The light of the warp flickered around him, and the whispers of the dark gods filled the air like a chorus of serpents. They promised him victory. They promised him immortality, but in the stillness of his mind, Horus felt something else, regret. A faint echo of what he had once been. He remembered standing beside his father upon Ulanor, when the stars themselves had sung of triumph. He remembered the warmth of the emperor's hand upon his shoulder, the pride in his voice when he named him Warmaster. He remembered love, and it tore at him like a blade. He turned away from the viewscreen. Around him stood his champions, Abaddon, the first captain of the sons of Horus, grim and silent, Typhon of the Death Guard, his flesh already rotting with Nurgle's gifts, Karn of the World Eaters, trembling with bloodlust, and Erebus, the word-bearer priest whose whispers had first led Horus into damnation. The time has come, Horus said, his voice low, cold, final. Bring the full host to bear. I will break this world myself. The next phase of the siege began with the fall of the Lion's Gate spaceport. The assault was led by the Iron Warriors under Perturabo. Their engines of war, massive, demonic constructs powered by enslaved machine spirits, pounded the walls for days without rest. The loyalists within fought desperately, manning every turret, every barricade, but nothing could withstand the endless tide. The World Eaters charged through the breach, howling like beasts. The Death Guard followed, spreading filth and plague into every corridor. The air itself became poison. Sanguinius led the counterattack. He descended from the heavens like a comet, his blade a streak of white fire. Wherever he struck, traitors fell by the dozen. His presence inspired those around him, the Blood Angels, the Custodians, even mortal soldiers who had not slept in weeks. For a brief moment, they pushed the enemy back, but the numbers were too great. The Lion's Gate fell. The traitors raised their banners upon its towers. From that moment onward, the skies above Terra were lost. Horus's ships began landing legions of reinforcements directly upon the surface. The siege tightened. Inside the palace, Rogaldorn convened a final council of war. The primarchs present were few: Sanguinius, Jagatai Khan, and Vulcan. The others were dead, missing, or trapped far beyond reach. The chamber was lit by the dim light of hollow projectors showing the palace's failing defenses. "We can no longer hold the outer walls," Dorn said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were rimmed with sleepless fury. "We fall back to the sanctum. We will defend the Eternity Gate to the last man." Sanguinius nodded. "We will not yield." Jagatai Khan smiled faintly. "We were born for this, brother. To die with the Emperor's name upon our lips." None of them spoke of victory anymore. Only duty. The Emperor stood apart from them, silent. His thoughts were far away, on Horus, on the webway, on the dream that had become a nightmare. He turned to Dorn at last. "You must hold the walls. Whatever happens, you must keep the traitors from the throne room." Dorn bowed his head. "Even if it costs every soul on Terra." The Emperor nodded once. "Then so be it." In the nights that followed, if they could still be called nights, visions plagued the defenders. Sanguinius dreamed of a dark throne, and upon it, Horus is his brother, wearing the Emperor's crown. He saw himself standing before that throne, broken and bleeding. He saw his father's hand reaching for him through the void. Too late, when he awoke, his tears had burned small scars upon his cheeks. He said nothing of the dream. But he knew it was no dream. It was prophecy. Told Dorn he would hold the Eternity Gate alone if need be, and so, when dawn came, a dawn that burned crimson through the dust, the Blood Angels took their positions at the gate. For 3 days and 3 nights, they fought without pause. Every wave of traitors that came against them was broken. The ground before the gate became a mound of corpses. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, blood, and faith. When Sanguinius's wings finally tore under shrapnel and exhaustion, he did not fall. He fought on, his blade still shining behind him. Civilians were evacuated deeper into the palace. Priests whispered prayers for deliverance that none believed would come, and high above, upon his flagship, Horus watched. It was then that something changed. The Emperor's psychic presence had begun to grow, bright and terrible. It was like a beacon in the warp, a flare of divine will that pushed back the shadows. Even the dark gods stirred in unease. Horus felt it, his father's mind, reaching through the storm, calling to him. And in that moment, Horus realized that if the Emperor lived, his rebellion would be meaningless. Humanity would remember him not as a liberator, but as a traitor damned by history, and so he chose to end it. He lowered the shields of his ship. Across the void, every loyalist sensor detected it at once. The vengeful spirit's shields were down. For the first time since the siege began, the Warmaster was vulnerable. Rogaldorn saw the opportunity immediately. "He's challenging us," he said grimly. "He wants the Emperor to come to him." The Emperor's eyes closed for a long moment. Then he turned to Sanguinius. "My son," he said softly, "you must go before me." Sanguinius bowed. "I understand." He did. For he had seen this moment in his vision. in a flash of golden light, the Emperor and Sanguinius, accompanied by a small contingent of custodians, teleported to the vengeful spirit, but the ship was no longer a ship. It was a nightmare given form, its corridors twisted upon themselves, defying geometry. The walls pulsed like living flesh. The air reeked of blood and ozone. Screams echoed from nowhere. The boarding party was separated immediately by the ship's demonic nature. The Emperor walked alone through corridors that shifted like serpents, his light pushing back the madness. Sanguinius, too, found himself alone until he reached the throne chamber. There, upon a dais of black iron, stood Horus. The Warmaster's armor was warped, his once noble face transformed into something both divine and monstrous. He turned as his brother entered, and for a moment, the shadow of love crossed his features. Sanguinius, Horus said quietly. You should not have come. I had to, the angel replied. To remind you of what you were. Horus smiled sadly. What I was is dead. Their eyes met one final time, then the Warmaster struck. The battle that followed was not one of armies, but of gods. The walls of the throne chamber melted under their blows. Sanguinius fought with desperate grace, each strike a prayer, each block a memory of the brother he loved, but Horus was stronger, empowered by the chaos gods themselves. He struck Sanguinius down, his talons piercing the angel's chest. As Sanguinius fell, he whispered a single word, Father, and then the angel was still, his blood stained the floor like sunlight dying. The Emperor arrived moments later, saw his son lying motionless, and his heart, if such a being could still possess one, broke. Horus stood over the corpse, his expression unreadable. He would not see reason, he said softly. None of you would. The Emperor's voice was quiet, heavy with sorrow. You have damned yourself, Horus. No, the Warmaster replied. I have freed mankind. The air around them trembled. Lightning arced across the chamber as their wills met. The warp screamed. Reality itself strained beneath the pressure of their power, and thus began the final duel. The throne chamber of the vengeful spirit was no longer bound by mortal laws. It had become a place between realities, part of the materium, part of the warp. The floor was made of iron and bone, the air thick with psychic storms that glowed red and gold. Ghosts drifted in the shadows, echoes of lives destroyed by Horus's rebellion. The symbols of chaos burned faintly upon the walls, pulsing like heartbeats. In the center stood two figures, father and son. They had once been the same light, born of the same vision. Now they were opposites, perfect mirrors of creation and destruction, the Emperor, radiant, terrible, silent. His armor was golden, but dimmed by sorrow. In his hand, he held no weapon, for he had come not to kill but to end a nightmare, and Horus, once his brightest son, now crowned in ruin. The Warmaster's eyes burned like twin suns, his armor fused with demonic flesh, his every breath shaking the air. His voice carried both fury and pleading. Look at what you made me, Horus said softly. The Emperor's reply was a whisper. I made you perfect. Perfect? Horus laughed bitterly. Perfect to obey. Perfect to serve. You called us sons, but we were slaves. You hid the truth from us, that you would rule mankind as a god while we, your children, became forgotten relics. I never wished to be a god, the Emperor said, his voice steady though his heart ached. I wished only to free mankind from the chains of ignorance. Then why do they worship you? Horus's tone grew harsh, the air trembling with each word. Why do they die in your name? Why do they kneel? Because they need hope. Hope is a lie, Horus hissed. And so are you. He raised his clawed hand, and the chamber erupted in fire. The duel began with thunder, bolts of psychic energy shattered the floor, ripping open cracks that led into the warp. Horus's laughter echoed through the void as he struck, his blows fueled by all four ruinous gods. Each movement was impossibly fast, each strike strong enough to shatter mountains. The Emperor blocked them all barely. His power was immense, but restrained. He fought not to destroy, but to save what little remained of his son's soul. Horus, he called out, between blows that shook the heavens, "It is not too late." The Warmaster sneered. "You don't understand, father. It was never about me. It was about you. About showing the galaxy that gods can bleed." He struck again, and this time, his talons tore through the Emperor's armor. Golden blood spilled onto the floor, burning like liquid sunlight. The Emperor staggered back, his expression unreadable. In that moment, Horus hesitated. For a heartbeat, he saw his father not as a tyrant, but as the man who had once smiled upon him, who had called him son. A flicker of sorrow crossed his face, but then the voices came, whispers of chaos, curling like serpents in his mind. "Finish it," they hissed. "End him. Take your throne," Horus roared, and the hesitation died. He struck again, faster, harder. The Emperor faltered beneath the storm. Across the galaxy, psychers screamed as the battle rippled through the warp. Stars flickered. Entire worlds shuddered beneath psychic echoes of the duel. Every being attuned to the immaterium felt it, the clash of god and demigod, father and son, love and ruin. Back on Terra, the storm grew. Rogel Dorn stood upon the walls of the Eternity Gate, looking to the skies where lightning raged in unnatural patterns. The air vibrated with power. He knew, without words, what was happening. The Emperor was fighting Horus, Sanguinius was dead, and the end was near. Within the palace, Malkador still sat upon the golden throne. His body was failing. His skin had become translucent, his veins glowing faintly with psychic light. He was no longer human, but a vessel through which the Emperor's great machinery could function. The custodians who guarded him stood in silence, watching as their regent slowly disintegrated. Malkador smiled faintly, his lips cracked with light. "Almost done, my lord," he whispered, though the Emperor could no longer hear him. Just a little longer. When he finally exhaled for the last time, his body turned to ash. The webway gate behind him flared with uncontrolled power, but the throne held, for now, and his name passed into legend as Malkador the hero. On the vengeful spirit, the duel reached its height. The Emperor had ceased to speak. His silence now was not mercy, but mourning. He understood, finally, that Horus could not be saved. The corruption ran too deep. The Chaos Gods had consumed what humanity remained in him, but even then, the Emperor did not hate his son. As Horus struck again, the Emperor deflected the blow and placed his hand upon the Warmaster's shoulder. For a moment, light flared between them, not weapon light, but memory. They stood again upon Ullanor, surrounded by cheering soldiers. The Emperor's hand rested on Horus's shoulder as he named him Warmaster. Horus smiled, proud and radiant, and then the memory burned away. The Emperor saw the truth. If Horus lived, the galaxy would fall into eternal darkness. The warp would claim humanity forever. Billions more would die. His great work, the dream of reason and unity, would be lost. There was no choice left. He whispered, "Forgive me, my son." And then the light of the Emperor flared brighter than the sun. What followed cannot be fully described. Witnesses, if such things can be said to exist within that realm, later claimed the vengeful spirit became a star. Its hull melted into molten iron, its decks flooded with psychic fire. The warp screamed as the Emperor unleashed the full force of his power. The Chaos Gods recoiled, retreating into the immaterium. Horus's armor shattered under the radiance, the demonic energy within him burning away. For the first time since Davin, his eyes were clear. He looked upon his father, not as an enemy, but as the man who had once loved him, and he smiled. "It's finally over." The Emperor reached for him, but Horus was already fading. His body disintegrated, turned to dust by the purity of the Emperor's power. The Warmaster of Chaos, the brightest son of mankind, was no more. The Emperor fell to his knees. Around him, silence. The demons were gone. The storm had vanished. But so too had the light. Aboard the dying ship, Rogel Dorn and his honor guard finally teleported in. What they found was a nightmare. The corridors were burnt hollow, the air filled with the scent of ozone and blood. Shadows moved where no light should reach. They followed the psychic trail through twisted halls until they found the throne chamber. The Emperor lay upon the ground, his golden armor broken and blackened. His face was pale, his eyes half closed. He was alive, but barely. Sanguinius's body lay beside him, the angel's wings folded gently across his chest, as though by the Emperor's own hands. Dorn fell to his knees. "My lord," the Emperor's lips moved, but no sound came. His psychic presence was dimmed to a whisper. "Take me home," he managed at last. Dorn obeyed. They brought him back to Terra, through the wreckage of the traitor fleet. The skies above the palace cleared for the first time in months. The red haze faded. The fires dimmed. When the news spread that Horus was dead, the traitor forces broke. Some fled into the warp, howling in rage. Others fought to the death, screaming the Warmaster's name. The demons, without their anchor, dissipated like smoke in sunlight. Terra was saved, but the cost was beyond imagining. Inside the Sanctum Imperialis, the surviving Primarchs gathered around their father's broken form. The custodians had laid the Emperor upon the golden throne, the machine he had built to save mankind from the warp. It was the only thing that could sustain his shattered body. Rogaldorn's face was pale with grief. Vulcan stood in silence, tears falling upon the marble floor. Jagatai Khan bowed his head, whispering a prayer in his own tongue. When they activated the throne, the Emperor's eyes opened, not with human light, but with the cold glow of eternity. He spoke into their minds, his voice now disembodied, vast, distant. "Horus is gone, but the war is not over." Dorn clenched his fists. "We will find the rest of the traitors, father. We will burn their legions to ash." The Emperor's voice echoed faintly, like a dying star. "No. You must rebuild. Protect what remains." "What of you, my lord?" whispered Dorn. "I will endure," the Emperor replied. "My body is broken, but my will is eternal. Through the throne, I will guide mankind. The dream must not die." The words filled them with both hope and despair, for they knew what it meant. The Emperor would never walk again. His mortal body was gone, his consciousness bound to the throne forever, had become what he never wished to be, a god outside the palace. The survivors gathered, millions knelt upon the scorched plains, their armor dented, their banners burned. They looked up to the dawn that now broke through the ash. For the first time in years, sunlight touched the surface of Terra, and though the Emperor's voice no longer thundered across the heavens, his presence could still be felt, a quiet warmth, a lingering echo of divinity. The people began to whisper prayers, not as soldiers, but as believers. They built altars from the rubble. They raised statues from the bones of the fallen. They began to call him the God Emperor of mankind, and thus, the Imperial Creed was born. In the days that followed, Rogaldorn organized the retreat of the Loyalist forces. The surviving Space Marines buried their dead in vast tombs beneath the palace. The Blood Angels entombed Sanguinius in a great sarcophagus of crystal, his wings spread as though in eternal flight. Across the ruins, the Mechanicum repaired what could be repaired. The custodians sealed the inner gates, and in the silence of the throne room, the Emperor's spirit whispered commands to his chosen. The Imperium was reborn, not as the dream of reason he had once envisioned, but as a theocracy forged in blood and sorrow. The Great Crusade had ended, the Age of Imperium had begun. Far from Terra, the traitor legions fled, the sons of Horus scattered into the Eye of Terror, broken and leaderless. The World Eaters, the Death Guard, the Word Bearers, all vanished into the warp, where time itself lost meaning. They would become legends of terror, gods of a new dark age, but they had lost, and the Emperor, half alive, half divine, watched them go. His mind stretched across eternity. He saw the future of mankind, endless war, endless faith, endless survival. A future built upon the ashes of the past, and though his body was still, his voice echoed through the immaterium, "I am the Emperor. I watch over humanity. I guard the light in the darkness." Thus ended the Siege of Terra. The galaxy would never heal from its wounds. 10,000 years would pass, and still the fires of that war would burn. The sons of the Emperor would become myths, their deeds retold in 1,000 worlds. The Warmaster's rebellion would be spoken of not as a tragedy, but as a lesson that even the brightest light can cast the deepest shadow, and upon the golden throne, the Emperor would sit unmoving, his body dead but his will eternal. watching over his imperium of man. His dream of unity was gone. But in its place, a god was born, a god who never wished to be one. So the stars burned on, silent witnesses to a father's love, a son's fall, and the birth of an empire that would last 1,000,000 years. The throne chamber aboard the vengeful spirit was silent after the emperor struck the final blow. The echo of Horus's death faded into the warp like the last note of a dirge sung across eternity. Where once demons screamed and reality bent, now there was stillness. The ship itself, once alive with the corruption of chaos, shuddered and groaned, as though mourning its master. The emperor stood unmoving, his armor cracked, his face shadowed. In his arms, he held the broken body of Sanguinius. He said nothing. He did not weep, only the light around him dimmed, as though grief itself were devouring the divine flame within. He looked upon Horus's corpse, what was left of it, and for a fleeting moment, the father saw not the traitor, but the son he had loved. He remembered the laughter at Ullanor, the pride in the boy's eyes, the loyalty that once burned brighter than any star, and now that light was gone. He whispered words that no mortal could hear, then he turned, slowly, painfully, and vanished in a flash of golden radiance, taking Sanguinius's body with him. The throne chamber was left empty, save for the shadows that had watched gods die. When the emperor reappeared within the palace, the defenders at first thought it was a miracle. The golden light filled the hall of eternity, illuminating broken marble and bloodied banners, but when the light faded, they saw the truth. The emperor was not as he had been, his armor was shattered. His right hand hung limp, burned to bone. His eyes, those infinite, terrible eyes, were dim, flickering like dying stars. Sanguinius lay at his feet, his wings folded like those of a fallen angel. Rogaldorn rushed forward, disbelief tearing through his battle-hardened face. "Father?" The emperor looked upon him, but said nothing. His lips moved, yet no sound came. Then his body fell forward, lifeless, crumpling to the floor beside the angel. The world stopped. For a moment that seemed eternal, there was only silence. Every soldier, every priest, every servant who stood within the palace felt something within their souls fracture. Rogaldorn knelt beside his father, his gauntlets trembling. He pressed his hand to the emperor's chest. There was no heartbeat. "No," Dorn whispered. "No, this cannot be." He lifted the emperor's body, as if by sheer will he could defy reality itself. He carried him, his father, his god, his emperor, to the golden throne. Malcador was already there, his own body barely recognizable. The sigillite had aged centuries in mere hours. His flesh was withered, his eyes hollow. He smiled faintly as Dorn approached. "He did it, didn't he?" Dorn nodded, tears falling freely. "Horus is dead." Malcador's head fell back. "Then my duty is done." He exhaled once, quietly, peacefully, and was gone. They placed the emperor upon the golden throne. Even in ruin, his form radiated power. The custodians and the tech priests worked in frantic silence, connecting golden cables, whispering rites of repair, invoking the machine god's blessings. They hoped, perhaps foolishly, that he would rise again, but he did not. Instead, a light, soft and faint, began to glow from his chest. It spread through the machinery of the throne, through the conduits and circuits that ran deep into the planet's core. The light reached the webway portal beneath Terra, and sealed it shut. The emperor's will, though trapped within a dying body, still endured. He had saved humanity one final time. But he would never walk among them again. The battle outside raged on for hours after Horus's death. His armies did not yet know their master was gone. The traitor legions fought with renewed madness, their demonic patrons driving them to slaughter without end. Then, one by one, the warp storms began to fade. Ships of the traitor fleets found their demonic engines failing. Summoned horrors dissolved into smoke. The link that bound Horus's armies to the ruinous powers was breaking, and then the loyalists struck back. Jagatai Khan led the White Scars in a lightning counterattack across the devastated plains of the Himalaysian plateau. Vulcan of the Salamanders emerged from the ruins, his hammer glowing with the Emperor's flame, leading thousands of mortal soldiers who had refused to flee. Together, they drove the enemy from the walls. The sons of Horus, is leaderless, broken, retreated into orbit. The Death Guard fled, their plagues burning away in the purifying light of Terra. the World Eaters tore themselves apart in mindless rage. Even the Iron Warriors, masters of siegecraft, abandoned their positions and vanished into the void. When the guns finally fell silent, only the dead remained to bear witness. The Siege of Terra was over, but there was no joy. The victory was ash, billions lay dead. The palace was a graveyard of marble and gold. The oceans of Terra boiled with the heat of orbital bombardment, the skies would remain dark for a generation, and upon the golden throne sat the Emperor, neither dead nor alive. His spirit lingered within the machine, holding back the tide of the warp with unending vigilance. Through his will, the Astronomicon burned, a psychic beacon guiding humanity's ships across the stars. Without him, the Imperium would be lost in eternal night, and so he endured. Rogel Dorn, broken but resolute, took command of the Imperium. He ordered the bodies of the fallen Primarchs, Sanguinius, Ferrus Manus, and those lost to corruption, be honored in silence. He forbade songs of triumph. There is no victory, he said, only survival bought with the blood of gods. It was Dorn who oversaw the reconstruction of the palace. Every shattered wall was rebuilt, every banner rewoven. But he left one chamber untouched, the Hall of Sanguinius. There, the angel's body lay preserved in stasis, his expression serene, his wings folded as though he were only sleeping. To the common people of Terra, he became a saint. To the warriors who had fought beside him, he remained the heart of their sorrow. Years passed, the scars of the siege never healed, whole continents were reduced to wastelands. Entire populations vanished, but humanity endured, because it had no other choice. The surviving loyalists gathered under the banner of the Imperium once more. From Mars, the Adeptus Mechanicus rebuilt the fleet. From the ashes of the Imperial army rose the Astra Militarum, and upon every world that survived the ruin, shrines were built, to the Emperor, to Sanguinius, to the fallen sons who had died for mankind's soul. The ecclesiarchy was born in this age of despair. Priests and preachers spoke of the Emperor not as a man, but as a god, immortal, divine, eternal, and though Rogel Dorn resisted this at first, he knew the truth. Humanity needed faith more than truth. So he let the lie live. But not all were content. The surviving loyalist Primarchs, Dorn, Guilliman, Vulcan, Kun, argued endlessly over the future. Some wanted to preserve the dream of the Great Crusade. Others saw that the dream was dead. It was Guilliman who finally brought order, returned from Macridge, took up the mantle of Lord Commander, and began to rebuild the Imperium in his father's name. Found the Emperor upon the throne, motionless, yet alive. When he stood before that golden corpse, he fell to one knee. "Father," he whispered, "I will keep your dream alive. I will guard your realm until you rise again." But in the depths of his soul, he felt only silence. In the void beyond Terra, the traitors fled to the Eye of Terror, a wound in the fabric of the galaxy that would never heal. There they would brood and plot, their once glorious legions now twisted beyond recognition. Horus's name became a curse, his legacy a warning whispered to children born long after the war's end, but the damage was done. The Imperium was no longer the shining empire it had been. It was now an empire of fear, faith, and fire. Where once there had been hope, now there was worship. Where once the Emperor had sought to free mankind from superstition, now he was its god. And so, the dream of unity became an empire of devotion. As centuries passed, the truth faded into legend. The Siege of Terra became a holy tale. The Emperor's duel with Horus became myth, told and retold until even the stars seemed to doubt it had ever been real. But some remembered. In the quiet halls of the Custodian Guard, old warriors still knelt before the golden throne, whispering their oaths. On Mars, the tech priests listened to the throne's hum, swearing they could still hear the Emperor's heartbeat within the machinery. And in the catacombs beneath the palace, the ghosts of fallen heroes lingered in eternal vigil. They remembered a time before gods, before madness, when the Emperor walked among men, and humanity believed it could conquer the stars. At the end of each Terran night, when the wind carried the ash of forgotten wars across the mountains, the people still looked up. They saw the faint light of the Astronomicon shining through the polluted sky, and they whispered prayers, not to a man, but to a god they would never see. For though the Emperor's body was broken, his will remained. And as long as that light burned, mankind would endure, even if it was only surviving, not living, even if the stars themselves had forgotten mercy. the Siege of Terra had ended, the age of the Emperor had begun, the great lie of humanity was complete, the Father who had forbidden worship was now its deity, the dream that had once sought enlightenment had become a religion of chains, and yet, in the silence of the throne, in the space between seconds, something still stirred, perhaps a whisper. Perhaps the faintest thought, perhaps a dream that one day, when the long night ends, he will rise again, to set right all that went wrong, to forgive his sons, to lead mankind, not as a god, but as a man once more. Until then, he endures silent, watching, waiting, for he is the Emperor of mankind, and his burden is eternal. The fires of Terra dimmed, but they never truly went out. Smoke lingered over the palace for years after the siege. Even when the stones were rebuilt and the banners rehung, the scent of ashes clung to the air, as though the planet itself refused to forget what it had endured, and above that scarred world sat the golden throne, its hum echoing through the hollow halls of the Imperium. Beneath the gold and the machinery, beneath the prayers and the cables, there sat the Emperor, immortal, unmoving, eternal. The light of his will radiated through the warp like a dying sun, faint but unyielding. He had won, but at a price so great that victory had no meaning. Rogaldorn remained on Terra, his armor never polished, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights, walked the silent corridors of the palace where the laughter of his brothers once echoed. Each step reminded him of what had been lost: Horus, Ferrus Manus, Sanguinius, even Fulgrim and Perturabo, whose loyalty had twisted into damnation, had not seen the Emperor move since that day, and yet, whenever he approached the throne, he could feel his presence. Like the warmth of a fire glimpsed through glass, Dorn often spoke to him, though he knew no answer would come. "My lord," he whispered once, kneeling before the radiant corpse, "we have rebuilt the walls. We have purged the traitors from the system. But humanity is broken. They look to you, but they see only silence." What should I tell them? No reply, only the endless hum of the throne, pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. So Dorn did what he had always done. He endured. The years following the siege came to be known as the Scouring. Across the stars, the loyalist legions struck back at the traitors. It was a war of vengeance, merciless and endless. The Ultramarines, under Robert Guilliman, became the hammer of the Imperium. The White Scars hunted the fleeing warbands through warp storms and asteroid fields. Vulcan and his salamanders brought fire to the heretic worlds that had turned against mankind. Even the shattered remnants of the Blood Angels fought on, driven by grief so deep it bordered on madness. One by one, the traitor legions were pushed back, their fleets shattered, their fortresses burned. The Warmaster was dead, but his shadow stretched across the galaxy like a scar. The sons of Horus fell into disarray, their identity shattered without their father. Abaddon, the first captain, gathered what remained and swore vengeance, not for the Emperor nor for Horus, but for the ideals both had betrayed. In time, he would become the new Warmaster. But that story lay far ahead. For now, the traitors retreated into the Eye of Terror, a wound in space that throbbed with the will of the Chaos Gods. The Scouring ended not with triumph, but with exhaustion. The Imperium had survived, but it was hollowed out, an empire without its heart. As the centuries passed, humanity forgot the truth of what had happened. What had once been history became legend. What had once been legend became religion. At first, the imperial bureaucracies sought to preserve the emperor's vision, a realm guided by reason, by science, by unity, but the people no longer wanted reason, they wanted hope, and so, slowly, quietly, the cult of the emperor began to grow. It started among the common folk, miners praying before his image, soldiers whispering his name before battle. Then came the priests, men and women who claimed to hear his voice through dreams, who built shrines in his honor, who spoke of his divine will. Rogaldorn tried to suppress them. He declared, "The emperor is no god. He is a man greater than all others, but still a man." But his words were lost in the tide of faith. When Guilliman returned from Ultramar, he saw that the cult had spread across every world. It would tear the Imperium apart, and so he did what all wise rulers must do in an age of despair. He embraced the lie to preserve the truth. The Adeptus Ministorum was born from that compromise. The Ecclesiarchy, as it came to be called, became the official church of the Imperium. It preached unity through worship, obedience through faith, and salvation through service to the God Emperor. From the ashes of reason, a religion was forged. The priests spoke of the Emperor's eternal sacrifice upon the golden throne, holding back the forces of chaos through his divine pain. They called him the master of mankind, the god of the Imperium, the light of Terra, and the people believed. They prayed to him, they killed for him, they died for him. At end time, even the warriors who had once walked beside him were remembered not as sons, but as saints. Sanguinius became the Red Angel of Mercy, Guilliman became the Avenging Sun, Rogaldorn became the Stone Saint, and the Emperor, the man who had forbidden gods, became the greatest god of all. While the faith of the people grew, another institution was born in shadow. The Inquisition. It began as a whisper within the halls of Terra, a gathering of scholars, psychers, and warriors who had seen the true face of chaos during the heresy. They knew what the common people could not, that the warp was alive, that its corruption never truly died, and that even victory was fragile. Their creed was simple: innocence proves nothing. They hunted corruption wherever it hid, among the priests, the nobles, the soldiers, even among the space marines. Their methods were ruthless, their authority absolute. They answered only to the Emperor himself, and though many feared them, they were necessary. For the same darkness that had seduced Horus still whispered across the stars. The Inquisition became the shield behind the faith, the knife in the dark that protected mankind from its own frailty. Rogaldorn's end came quietly, vanished during a void campaign against the forces of chaos. His flagship was found adrift, its hull torn open, its crew dead. Only his hand remained, preserved in stasis and enshrined within the phalanx, the great fortress ship of the Imperial Fists. To his sons, his death was not an end but a duty fulfilled. Guilliman mourned him deeply, for with Dorn's passing, another link to the Golden Age was gone. The brothers were scattered across the stars, fading into legend. Vulcan disappeared into the fires of Nocturne, seeking some secret known only to him. Jagatai Khan rode into the webway, chasing dark Eldar raiders, and was never seen again. Corvus Corax vanished into the shadows, whispering words of repentance before he was lost to time. The Imperium's gods had all gone silent, only Guilliman remained, writing the Codex Astartes, dividing the legions into smaller chapters to prevent another heresy. It was his gift and his curse. He gave order to chaos, but he could not heal the wound left in mankind's soul. As the millennia crawled on, Terra changed. The once bright marble cities became blackened hives, the skies darkened under the smoke of a billion factories. Where once the Emperor had dreamed of enlightenment, there now stood an empire of bureaucracy, dogma, and fear. Pilgrims came from across the galaxy to see the throne. They walked barefoot through the ash, carrying relics and prayers, singing hymns to a god they believed watched over them. Few ever saw him. Those who did often returned broken or silent, for to look upon the Emperor in his current state was to glimpse eternity, and the unbearable weight of his sacrifice. The Adeptus Custodes, ever vigilant, stood watch around the throne. They no longer called him Father. They called him the Master. They no longer sought his voice. They listened only to the silence, and yet, deep within that silence, something remained alive. The Astronomicon continued to burn. Across the warp, it shone as a beacon, guiding humanity's ships through the storms. Millions of psychers were sacrificed each year to keep that light alive. Their souls became fuel for the Emperor's will, their deaths ensuring the survival of billions more. It was a grim exchange, but such was the price of existence in the age after gods. And so the Imperium endured, not out of love, not out of hope, but out of necessity. It was too vast to fall, too fearful to change, too bound to its own faith to dream anew. Yet in the corners of the galaxy, stories persisted, whispers that one day the Emperor would rise again, that his body would heal, his soul restored, that he would walk once more among his children and cast down the corrupt priests who had twisted his vision. They called it the rebirth of light, others called it heresy, but the dream lived on. On the 10,000th anniversary of the siege, a storm rolled over Terra. It was said that the skies turned gold for a moment, that thunder rolled like the sound of drums upon Ullanor, that the hum of the throne grew louder than it had in centuries. Some claimed to see the Emperor's eyes flicker open, others said they heard his voice whisper through the warp, "My sons." But when the storm cleared, all was silent once more. The light faded, and the world went on, as it always had, forever waiting, forever enduring. The Imperium had become a monument to both faith and failure. Every world bore his image, every soul carried his name, and yet, few remembered who he truly was, a man who sought to free mankind from gods, only to become one himself. But perhaps, somewhere beyond time, beyond the veil of the warp, the Emperor still dreams. Perhaps he sees the galaxy not as it is, but as it could have been, bright, united, alive, and perhaps, in that dream, he still walks among the stars with his sons beside him, their laughter echoing through the void. Until that day, he endures. The sky above Terra was a swirling storm of fire. The warp and reality had merged into one great wound, bleeding madness across the heavens. What had once been blue and bright now burned crimson and gold, as the legions of chaos surrounded the palace of the Emperor. It was the final day, the last dawn of the Great Crusade's dream, and the first morning of humanity's darkest hour. Inside the walls of the Imperial Palace, every corridor shook under bombardment. Titans fell outside like collapsing mountains. The air was thick with ash and incense. Prayers of desperation echoed from the mouths of a billion soldiers. Even the most disciplined of warriors could feel it. The end was near. The Emperor sat upon his golden throne, surrounded by silence. Around him stood Malcador the Sigillite, Rogel Dorn, and a handful of loyal custodians. His face was pale, his eyes distant, as if staring into all time at once. He had seen this moment for centuries, the moment when all his creations turned against him. Far above the palace walls, the vengeful spirit, the flagship of Horus, drifted in low orbit. Its once proud hull was covered in sigils of the warp, its guns glowing with unholy power. And within its command chamber, Horus Lupercal stood before a panoramic window, watching Terra burn. He smiled, though there was sorrow hidden behind it. His body was no longer that of a man. The Chaos Gods had remade him into something divine and terrible. But deep inside that monstrous form, a flicker of the old Horus still remained, the son who had loved his father, who had believed in the dream of unity. That ember was what the Emperor sought to reach. When he finally rose from his throne, the Sigillite looked upon him with sadness. "You know what must be done," Malcador whispered. The Emperor nodded. "Yes. It is the end." He turned to Rogel Dorn, whose golden armor was cracked and bloodstained. "Hold the walls. No matter what happens. You must endure." Dorn bowed his head, voice trembling. "Father, you can't go alone." "I must," the Emperor replied softly. "This is not a battle of men anymore. This is a battle of gods." Then he vanished in a storm of light. On the surface, the siege reached its crescendo. The Traitor Legions surged forward in waves. Demons clawed at the ramparts, the air itself screaming. Bloodthirsters and greater demons battled Imperial knights in duels that shattered the ground beneath them. The Eternity Gate, the last entrance to the Sanctum Imperialis, was broken and rebuilt 100 times. Rogel Dorn fought like a man possessed. His chains were drenched in blood, both mortal and demonic. Sanguinius, the angelic Primarch, had already departed, guided by a fate he knew would claim his life. In the depths of the palace, Sanguinius stood before the teleportarium. His wings were torn and ragged, but his eyes burned with light. He knew Horus would not allow his father to come directly. He had to make the path. "Let me go first," the angel whispered to no one. "Let me see my brother one last time." And in a flash of white, he was gone. Aboard the vengeful spirit, Sanguinius appeared within the Warmaster's throne chamber. The walls were alive, flesh and metal intertwined, whispering with voices of the damned. Horus waited for him, standing beside his great war table, his weapon, the talon of Horus, is glimmering with the power of the warp. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Horus smiled, though his voice trembled. "So, the angel comes to die." Sanguinius stepped forward, his halo glowing faintly. "You don't have to do this, brother. You can still stop." Horus laughed, a sound that shook the ship. "Stop? Look outside, Sanguinius. Look at what I have done. I have broken the chains of the Emperor's tyranny. I have freed us. You have damned us, Sanguinius replied. You think chaos serves you? It owns you, Horus. Something inside Horus cracked. His smile twisted into rage. You always thought you were better than me, the beautiful one, the angel. But Father chose me. I was his favorite. Sanguinius lowered his weapon. He loved you as a son. I still do. For a brief second, Horus hesitated, but then the warp roared through him, and his claws struck. The battle was short but tragic. Sanguinius fought with all the grace of a god, his sword blazing with divine fury. He wounded Horus deeply, a wound that burned with purity. But Horus was no longer mortal. He crushed the angel's chest with a single blow. As Sanguinius fell, his blood scattered like starlight. His final breath carried a whisper, a warning, that would reach the Emperor's heart across the void, and then he was gone. Moments later, the Emperor appeared upon the vengeful spirit. The ship itself screamed at his arrival, demonic faces melted, metal ran like wax, the air burned with sanctity. Stepped into the throne chamber, and there lay Sanguinius, broken, his wings torn. Horus stood above him, his claws dripping. The Emperor's voice was quiet. Why, my son? Horus laughed, but there was sorrow in it. Because you made me too well. You taught me to dream, and then you kept the truth from me. The truth? That you were no god. You wanted to be one, but you chained yourself to this empire of dust. I will build something better, a universe without you. The Emperor's golden eyes dimmed. I never wanted to be a god. Only to save mankind from what you've become. Their gazes locked, father and son, creator and heir. The silence between them was thicker than the storm raging around. Then they fought. The duel between the Emperor and Horus was beyond mortal comprehension. Every strike tore holes in reality. Every parry echoed across the warp. The walls of the ship melted and reformed with each blow. Gods across the galaxy paused to watch. Korn roared in delight, Sench whispered in fascination, Nurgle laughed, and Slaanesh wept with pleasure. The Emperor wielded pure psychic light, the essence of humanity's hope. Horus wielded the darkness of chaos, the hatred of gods and mortals alike. They clashed across the stars. The Emperor struck Horus down once, but could not bring himself to kill him. For within that monstrous form, he still saw his son, the first Primarch, the beloved child who once called him father, and Horus saw it, and used it, struck back with all the power of the warp. His claw tore through the Emperor's chest, shattering his armor and spilling divine blood onto the floor. The master of mankind fell. Horus stood over him, triumphant. It's over, old man. You were never meant to rule forever. But then, something stirred. Across the battlefield on Terra, the loyal soldiers of humanity still fought. They screamed the Emperor's name even as they died. Custodians, sisters of silence, the imperial fists, all bled for him, and their faith reached him. The Emperor rose again, his form blazing with the light of a billion souls. His eyes burned with the fury of creation itself. Horus, he said, voice like thunder. I loved you once. But you are no longer my son. He unleashed his full power, the power of the warp cleansed by divine will. The light consumed Horus utterly. For a brief instant, Horus was freed from chaos, his human face returning, filled with regret. Father, he whispered. I'm sorry. Then he was gone, erased from existence. The vengeful spirit trembled as the warp's hold broke. Demons screamed and vanished. The Emperor, now gravely wounded, stood among the ruins, his life force fading. Rokel Dorn and the survivors of the Imperial Guard teleported aboard, finding him kneeling beside Sanguinius's body. My lord. Dorn cried, running to him. The Emperor looked at him, eyes dimming. It is done. Horus is gone. But the cost, Malkador was gone, the Sigillite's sacrifice complete. The palace was in ruins. The Emperor's physical form was shattered beyond healing. You must place me on the golden throne, he whispered. It is the only way. I can still protect humanity from within. Dorn wept, but obeyed, and so it was done. the Emperor's broken body was carried back to Terra, entombed within the Golden Throne. His light still burned a faint but eternal, keeping the warp from consuming mankind. The Loyalists mourned, the traitors fled, and the galaxy fell into the Age of Darkness. The dream of the Great Crusade had died. But the Emperor's will endured. 10,000 years later, his name would still echo across the stars. Billions would kneel before the throne, whispering prayers to the one who had saved them, though he could no longer speak, and deep within the immaterium, the echo of a father's final words still lingered, "My sons, remember me not as a god, but as a man who tried to save you all." Thus ended the Siege of Terra, the day the Emperor fell, and humanity began its long, grim march into eternity.